Welcome back to On Texas Football. I'm Jeff Howe, joined by CJ Vogel and Hank South. We're going to look at SEC offenses on the schedule that could give Will Muschamp's defense some problems in 2026. This edition of On Texas Football is brought to you by Prize Picks. And Hank, I'll start with you because you've got an interesting take to lead us off.
Yeah, I kind of went against the grain of, obvious talented offenses that Texas is going to see on their 2026 schedule. We've talked about them, but I'm going to go with the Florida Gators for a couple different reasons. And number one, their new offensive coordinator that came with John Summerall is Buster Faulkner, who is coming in from Georgia Tech. And if you followed the Georgia Tech series, I guess the last 3 years, there's been some really good games. And Buster Faulkner, who's the play caller, obviously, for the Yellow Jackets, has put them in position to be really competitive with Georgia, obviously with Will Muschamp on the Bulldogs sideline. And so with him at Florida now, he has Florida talent as opposed to Georgia Tech talent. And that's no shot at Georgia Tech. They obviously had some really talented kids, but it's a different step up at Florida now in the SEC. And we've talked about this on various shows, but he brought in his quarterback, Aaron Philo, to Florida. And obviously he's battling with Tramel Jones for that starting job, but obviously some familiarity with Buster Faulkner in the way he calls plays is really balanced attack of an offense. The wide receivers, probably the second best group Texas will see in the regular season, whether it be Eric Singleton, Dallas Wilson, who Texas fans know about, Vernell Brown, who's a former 5-star recruit. And then, of course, you can't forget Jaden Baugh, who everyone knows about Jaden Baugh. Texas fans know about Jaden Baugh. So I think just the fact that Buster Faulkner has familiarity calling plays against Will Muschamp, and he's pretty versatile in his play calling and obviously calling plays to the strengths of his best players. He has a lot of best players in Gainesville now. And so I could see that one kind of being a tricky game for Will Muschamp to call plays against, just from the fact that there's familiarity, there's a step up in talent, and it's going to be, again, I said the Florida game was the trap game, in my opinion, just in his placement on the schedule between Oklahoma and Ole Miss. I think that could be a tricky game in DKR for Texas.
Okay, good stuff, Hank. We'll come back to Florida because there's something that I want to get everybody's thoughts on regarding the Gators. But, CJ, what's your pick for the SEC offense on the schedule that could give Will Muschamp's defense the most problems this season?
Yeah, I have to go down to Baton Rouge. I have to pick Lane Kiffin here. Look, a Ole Miss Georgia game a year ago. Again, and Hank, I know you brought up Will Muschamp at Georgia as well. It's interesting because it's a very similar style that I'm expecting Texas to play defensively as Kirby Smart, but of course he wasn't calling the plays there. But I look at it and say, what offenses had success against this type of defense, right? Well, Lane Kiffin put 35 up on the board against Georgia a year ago. They ended up scoring, I believe, on 6 consecutive possessions, something that is very difficult to do against the Georgia defense. And then I look in its entirety, the body of work of what Ole Miss was able to do over the last 3 seasons under Lane Kiffin, 16th, 3rd, and then 8th in scoring offensive production each year. This is a team that knows how to score. They'll have the weapons, obviously, and they'll have a running attack that I think is very difficult to defend against. Harlan Berry, Caden Durham as well. But the big piece for me, and the one thing that I think when you talk to Steve Sarkisian about what unlocks their offense, it's very similar to that in Lane Kiffin. It's going to be Trey'Dez Green, the tight end, 6'7", 460 receiving yards a year ago, 8 touchdowns. He's a big body. Now in that offense, how much more unlocked will he get? We'll have to wait and see, but I think that is going to be a piece that ultimately makes things very difficult for anybody to defend against is Lane Kiffin at LSU.
Yeah, that's good stuff, CJ. There's a couple offenses that I thought about. Hank, I thought of Florida because of the Buster Faulkner crossover with he and Will Muschamp at Georgia, them being on the staff together under Kirby Smart. That's good. And, and both you guys hit on it. Like, Will Muschamp wasn't the play caller at Georgia, and it's been a minute since he's called defensive plays. So kind of like, okay, what do you look at to figure out which offenses could give him problems? And CJ, you hit on it. Like, okay, how has Georgia fared the last few years? Like, what offenses have given Kirby Smart's defense problems? And Hank, one of our old nemesis might be back around the corner, that Art Briles, Baylor, veer and shoot, and the offshoots of it, because look, a lot of it comes down to quarterback play. And if you've got a great quarterback in that offense, it can be tough to stop. But Josh Heupel runs a variation of it. Jeff Lebby has maybe the truest variation of it at Mississippi State. Lane Kiffin will do a little bit of that. To your point, CJ, they got a little bit of veer and shoot mixed in. They're kind of a distant cousin twice removed way down the family tree. And Ole Miss will still run some of it with John David Baker coming over to call the plays now. Joe Judge was with Kiffin, and he's still in charge of personnel. John David Baker was there with Jeff Levy. So you can get kind of different cross sections of it. But guys, I think it boils down to really good quarterback play. I don't care what system you're in. I think if you've got really good quarterback play, then you're going to give any defense problems. And Hank, that's where I like CJ's pick of going with Sam Leavitt and LSU, because when you look at the best quarterbacks that are on the schedule, you can make an argument that maybe it's Leavitt and Trinidad Chambliss for the two best quarterbacks Texas will play in conference play this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I considered Ole Miss as well, just because you look at that veteran quarterback returning in Trinidad Chambliss. And I probably would have been more bullish on Tennessee had Joey Aguilar got his waiver approved and he'd be back, but they're going to be rolling out a first-time starter in George McIntyre. But Ole Miss, you look at them, Trinidad Chambliss, he's got some new weapons from Syracuse. Actually, Jonte Cook, Texas fans, he's going to be making his return to DKR, assuming he's playing for the Rebels at that point in the season. And Keelan Lacey, who's maybe one of the best running backs in the country, if not the best, averages over 5 yards a carry, had 1,500 yards rushing last year with LSU, now at Ole Miss. So that's going to be a really challenging test. And again, you're coming off that, Oklahoma, Florida, and then next week you're playing Ole Miss. It's just a brutal schedule for Texas before they get a little bit of a rest. But yeah, Ole Miss can certainly present some problems with Chambliss's experience.
All right, CJ, I've got a question for you here in just a second, but before we get there, I want to remind everybody that this edition of On Texas Football is brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks. And the month of May is here. That means the weather's perfect for the most part. Everything is rolling on the sports calendar, and Prize Picks adds more fun to your favorite sports. Every possession, every at-bat, every shot, every pitch, it all matters when you're locked in with Prize Picks. You're locked in from start to finish because you're not just watching anymore. You got a little juice on it, and yeah, there's a chance to cash in too. And the best part about Prize Picks is it's easy. You don't need any kind of deep dives or complicated nonsense. You're just picking more or less on player stats. That's it. Points, hits, rebounds, strikeouts, whatever you're already watching, just build your lineup, submit it, and you're good. It takes about 60 seconds to build a lineup. And you got options: basketball, baseball, hockey, golf. You can stick to one or mix and match across multiple sports. Whatever's on, it just fits. Trust your gut, lock in your lineup, and now every single moment actually means something when you're playing with Prize Picks. Prize Picks is available in all 50 states, including right here in the great state of Texas. So if you haven't jumped in yet, now is the time. Just download the Prize Picks app, use the code HMA, play $5, and you'll get $50 in lineups instantly. Again, that's the code HMA when you download the Prize Picks app. 5 get you 50. It's that simple. And as always, play smart, play responsibly, play Prize Picks. CJ, I wanted to ask you about Hank's point about Florida, and you start going down Florida's personnel, and I feel like anytime we talk about Florida here on the channel, we can say the same thing. It's not a matter of talent with that program, and whether it's Dallas Wilson, Eric Singleton, Jaden Ball. CJ, can you make an argument that Florida, just in terms of raw talent, could be the most talented offense Texas plays this year?
Oh, that's going to be – I think so from a skill player perspective. Like add Vernell Brown into that conversation as well. Another very talented wide receiver who's produced in his career. That wide receiving core should be very deep. It'll probably be in the conversation for one of the top 2, maybe 3 best that Texas will play. Obviously, Ohio State will be in that conversation this year, but you add Jaden Ball as well, and you have the talent to run the football and guys to get open. Both sides, both facets of the offense should be very threatening. So yeah, I think the conversation could be there. I still look at a different style of offense that could put, a bit of a, put this Texas defense in tough situations. And it's going to be interesting to see what Arthur Smith comes up with at Ohio State. Because when he was with the Atlanta Falcons, what they like to do, well, besides having Bijan Robinson on the sideline, was 12 and 13 personnel, right? They like to load up and really get heavy with their personnel. And I look a little bit into that wide zone of Eli Drinkwitz as well and say, okay, if Texas can handle that run early against Ohio State and Bo Jackson, they might just be very well suited for the likes of a Missouri and Missouri, or a Texas A&M later on in Kyle Field. So that's something that I'm watching. But absolutely, Jeff, because we saw exactly what Texas could not do against Florida last year, and that was defend the run against Jaden Ball.
Yeah, and Hank, you look at it, and again, just looking at the offenses that have been able to compete well against Georgia, really kind of with the exception of Texas, in the SEC championship game a couple of years ago. The ones that have done it have been the ones, to CJ's point, that have been able to run the football. So you look at Florida, Missouri. We're recording this on Monday. This is coming out on Monday, and we learned Monday morning about the Ahmad Hardy situation over the weekend. So we don't know what the future holds for him in the Missouri run game. But hey, Ole Miss is another one because Kewan Lacey. If Ahmad Hardy's not the best running back in the SEC, and it's not Jaden Baugh, it might be Kewan Lacey. So I start looking, Hank, at those offenses that can run the football. And to CJ's point about Texas A&M, that's kind of been one of the things the Aggies haven't been able to do against Texas is really get the run game established, and it's hurt them in the last 2 games.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's something that Mike Elko is really trying to emphasize with Holman Wiggins being the new play caller in College Station is to get that going to, take some pressure off of Marcel Reed a little bit and maybe get that offense going more again, at least against Texas. But yeah, it's stacked running back roster that Texas is going to see. We're talking about SEC opponents, but obviously Bo Jackson had a standout freshman year at Ohio State. They're going to get tested early with him. He rushed for over 1,000 yards. So that'll be, an early test for the Texas defense. But you just look back at, this is why they went out and loaded up with veteran experience in the portal. They replenished their linebacking core with Rasheem Biles, with Justin Cryer. They got a guy like Bo Masco who can certainly, defend the run at the nickel position. They have a very deep defensive front. We saw them very active in that spring showcase back in April in DKR. So that's going to be a heavy emphasis and getting to the ball. Obviously Will Muschamp's defense are very physical in nature, but they want to make things difficult for the quarterback, in the backfield, and that obviously extends to the running game as well. And so that's what you could see them doing in the portal to address that.
Yeah. Hey, Jeff, let me ask you this, because we've talked a lot about what type of different styles might give Texas fits. I look at an air raid. I look at Oklahoma and Ben Arbuckle. I look at Jeff Lebby a little bit with the tempo and spacing the field out, kind of in that, that cousin of the veer and shoot. Does that play into Texas's strengths for you?
Well, I think it depends. And Oklahoma's as Hank was laying it out there in regards to Texas A&M, Oklahoma's the offense I thought about because, Ben Arbuckle does have his roots in the air raid. And where the air raid can give you problems, where it can give, kind of these Nick Saban, Kirby Smart, Will Muschamp defenses problems, if you can combine the tempo with the ability to run the football, now you get your RPOs going. Now you get your play action passes going, which when you get to play action, now you can get double moves going on the outside. And now you're using their aggression against them. So yes. And I want to get both your guys' thoughts on this. Hank, I'll start with you. And then CJ, you can fill it in as well as we wrap this up. The other part about Oklahoma that concerns me, Will Muschamp has coached in the Texas OU game, but even, he'd been in big time games and been with Nick Saban. They were at LSU and he'd been at Auburn. He'd coached in the Iron Bowl. He'd coached in national championship games. He coached in the NFL. But even he said his first go around Texas OU in 2008, he said it was different. He wasn't really prepared for just everything that goes into that game. And between John Mateer's thumb, CJ, maybe the inexperience, I thought maybe we saw some of that from Ben Arbuckle this year. But you've got Mateer's now played in it one time, didn't go so well. Ben Arbuckle's called plays in it one time, it didn't go so well. Will Muschamp's coming back to it. So I just think, Hank, that's going to add to the uniqueness of that game. If Oklahoma can establish the run, which based on the sample we got last year is easier said than done, then the Ben Arbuckle style of the air raid where you can incorporate play action passes and use double moves, use the defense's aggression against them, it can give Will Muschamp some problems their second go around in Red River. Yeah,
absolutely. And they're, Oklahoma's going to have gone through the gauntlet before they get to the Red River shootout. Like they're going to be tested. We're going to see what they're made of. And so, are we going to get an Oklahoma limping in? Sometimes that's not an advantage to Texas where it's like, now this is their whole season, that game, or are they going to be hot? Are they going to have, 2 big ranked wins coming in? But it goes back to, having an experienced quarterback and, say what you want about John Mateer. He's been around for a while and now he does have experience in that game, which was, a fairly tight game until Ryan Niblett's punt return. So that's always going to be competitive. There's always extra fire in that game, regardless of this transfer portal era, NIL era. Like that game still means something to these players on that team. So it'll be a very curious to see how Mateer fits with these new receivers. Obviously Parker Livingston, that's going to be a huge storyline entering that game. They got another big time receiver from Syracuse, I believe. Obviously Fasusi at left tackle coming back for his second year. And obviously the stout defense. We're talking about offense, but I'll be curious to see how everything kind of gels together and how they perform in those early season games ahead of entering that Red River Shootout.
And CJ, to Hank's point, I think you look at both sides of the coin. Texas will have played Tennessee before facing Oklahoma, so you get a little bit of a vibe for that offense. But Oklahoma will have also played Georgia before that game, so they really get kind of a test run to go against that style of defense before they get to Dallas.
Yeah, it's going to be kind of a precursor to what Texas will bring to Dallas for that game. But ultimately, it's X's and O's are great, but do you have the Jimmies and Joes that will execute it? And the same way that we started the show off talking about how Florida might have one of the sneakier, most impressive groups of skill position players on their roster this year, I look at Oklahoma and say, do they have the horses that can keep up with what Texas will put out defensively? And on the flip side, I don't know if Isaiah Satania and Trell Harris and that group of Parker Livingston and beyond, if that's a group that I look at knowing what Texas will deploy defensively and say, okay, this puts a fear in me, the same way that a Dallas Wilson and an Eric Singleton and Vernell Brown would with Florida. So do they have the guys that will match up with the scheme that should give Texas fits? Right now, I don't believe so.
All right, good stuff, guys. Hank, CJ, thank you guys for the knowledge, the intel, the expertise, as always. Big thank you to Matthew behind the scenes for producing it. Thank you to our friends over at Prize Picks for sponsoring this edition of On Texas Football. If you're not a member over at ontexasfootball.com, you still have time to get over to the site and take advantage of our spring sale. When you sign up, just use the promo code OTFOG and become an OTFOG and get 1 year of access at ontexasfootball.com for just $39.95. Make sure that you like this video, that you're subscribed to the On Texas Football YouTube channel, and that you've got those notifications set. That way, anytime we drop a video or go live, you're not missing any of our Longhorn coverage or breaking news. For Hank, for CJ, for Matthew, for the entire On Texas Football staff, I'm Jeff Howe. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and until next time, hook 'em.
Hey guys, Blake Monroe here from Coffee and Football. YouTube thinks that you're going to like this video right here, and if the algorithm knows ball, it's a good one. So go check it out, and then don't forget, hit that like and subscribe button.